the greatest democracy on earth. We have seen more states pass more laws, pushing more voters out of the ballot box than we have seen in the past 100 years. Next year we will remember the sacrifice of Medgar Evers. And the year after, that will be the 50th anniversary of the sacrifice of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. The laws that those men died 50 years ago, gave their lives 50 years ago, seeking to invalidate, were put in place 50, 60, 70 years before that. And we had a century in this country, after the Civil War, after blacks had been given the right to vote, where the vote itself was tilted so severely that people of color in this country could not aspire to run for office without being laughed at. We are dealing with, at this moment, the instituting of a new poll tax. And what has been underreported across this country is that we have turned the tide back towards democracy, state after state after state. We have one in Wisconsin. We have one in Minnesota. We have one in North Carolina. We have one in Texas. We have one in Mississippi. We have one in Florida. We have one in South Carolina. And yet here we find ourselves. We have one in Michigan, actually inspiring a Republican governor to veto the law. And yet we find ourselves here in the literal cradle of our great democracy, in the place where independence was declared. But also, if we are honest, in the place where populists and those who believed in full democracy were first betrayed. By men who believe that only white rich men who own property should vote and the rest of us should be locked out. And the question in front of Pennsylvania today is, which way, Pennsylvania? Forward. In line with the tradition of democracy in this country, or backwards towards dark days long since forgotten. I want to be very clear. Not only are we turning the tide, but this is not and never has been simply a Republican thing or a partisan thing. As I mentioned, we have seen Republican governors in Virginia say, don't even bring me a strict photo ID law, or I will veto it. And you know what? That's why they don't have one. We've seen a Republican governor in Michigan say, you brought it to me, so I'm vetoing it because it's against democracy. This is not a Republican thing, it is an extremist thing. John Heinz will be rolling over in his grave. Jack Kemp will be rolling over in his grave. We must be very clear that what we are fighting for in this moment is democracy itself. Our opponents believe that this will tilt things in their favor. We've heard Tarazi say that the election is in the bag for Romney because of this law. Small-minded men, so small who would contort our democracy for their own partisan purposes, have no place in our democracy. They are not just a shame to our country, they are a shame to their own party. I am proud that standing with us today are our allies in labor. I am proud that standing with us today are students who will inherit this democracy from all of us. I am proud that standing with us today are senior citizens like my 96-year-old grandmother, who unfortunately are old enough to remember the old poll tax, the feeling of joy when they got rid of it, and now this new one being put back in place. And I'm here today to promise them and our young people that we will get rid of this one in Pennsylvania too. My colleagues would indulge me. I'd like to depart from the program one small way and bring forward Lenny McAllister. Lenny, many of you may know, is a voice of blacks who are active in the Tea Party movement. Lenny is very clear that on this issue, this core issue of civil rights and democracy, The only way that a reasonable person who believes in small d democracy in this country can come down is against voter ID. Let us remember, as we stand here today, that we have far more allies than we can see. We have far more allies than we can assume. And while some would be so crass as to say that this court split 3-3 between conservatives and liberals, between Republicans and Democrats, could only end up in a deadlock, we've already seen the Chief Justice break with us on redistricting, and there's reason to hope that he remembers men like Jack Kemp. He remembers men like John Hines. And he remembers that there are still men in his party like Lenny McAllister who believe that democracy doesn't end at the borders of the Democratic Party, and who believe that all of us should have the right to vote, and none of us should be sent back towards a day when we have things that can only be described as a poll tax. God bless.
God bless.